All right, let's talk about one of the most spectacular, just wild stories in modern business history. It's a tale of insane ambition, absolutely dizzying numbers, and a collapse so total it sent shockwaves through the entire tech world. We're talking about Baiju's. I want you to just look at this number for a second. $22 billion. dollars. At its absolute peak in 2022, that was the valuation of Baiju's. It made them the most valuable education technology company on the entire planet. They weren't just a success story. They were the poster child for India's booming startup scene. And then, just 2 years later, this. Zero. Not a slow fizzle, not a gradual decline, a complete and total wipeout. By late 2024, the company's own founder, Baiju Ravindran, had to publicly admit that his company's valuation had effectively collapsed to nothing. So that's the big question here, isn't it? How on earth does that happen? How does a company that attracted the world's biggest investors, a company that completely dominated its market, just vanish in value? Okay, let's dive into this. Look, to really get how this all fell apart, you first have to appreciate the incredible, almost unbelievable speed and scale of the rise. Baiju's wasn't just another startup. It was a genuine phenomenon that completely redefined what we thought was possible in ed tech. So you've probably heard this term unicorn thrown around in the tech world, right? Hitting a billion-dollar valuation is a massive, massive deal. They call them unicorns because for the longest time, a company reaching that size was thought to be just as rare and mythical. It's the milestone every single founder dreams about. But Baiju's didn't just stop at unicorn. No way. They blew right past that to become a decacorn, a company worth over $10 billion. This puts you in an incredibly elite global club. We're talking the absolute top tier, a tiny faction of the most successful startups ever created. And just look at the timeline here. The speed is absolutely insane. Founded in 2011, it takes them just 7 years to hit unicorn status. Then, only 2 years later, they're a decacorn. And 2 years after that, they hit that peak of $22 billion. I mean, this was growth on a scale that was almost unheard of. So the question is, how'd they do it? What was the engine that powered this absolute rocket ship? Well, it turns out it was a very specific and, a very, very aggressive strategy. The playbook was basically a 1-2 punch. First, they built this massively popular app using a freemium model. You know the drill. You get a little taste for free, and then a very high-pressure sales team goes to work to convert you into a paying subscriber. And second, they took all the money they were raising and just started buying up their competition to expand everywhere all at once. And when I say they went buying, I mean they went on an absolutely epic shopping spree. The company spent at least $2.8 billion acquiring other companies, just bolting them on to build this massive educational empire. And this really shows you that growth at all costs mindset in action. I mean, they weren't just buying small competitors. They acquired giants in their own right. Companies like Akash for test prep, Great Learning for higher ed, and Epic to get a huge foothold in the US market. They were literally buying revenue, buying users, buying market share. But here's the thing. This relentless, obsessive focus on growth was hiding a massive, fundamental problem. While the valuation was soaring into the stratosphere, the actual business model, well, it was cracking under the strain. And that brings us to the real heart of the issue. Okay, so we've got to talk about a concept called unit economics. Now, it sounds kind of jargony, I know, but I promise it's actually incredibly simple. It's just the basic fundamental math of a business. For every single unit, in this case, a customer, are you making more money from them than you spent to get them in the first place? So it all boils down to the relationship between two numbers. You've got LTV, or lifetime value. That's the total profit you'll ever make from one customer. And then you have CAC, or customer acquisition cost. That's all the money you spent on ads and salespeople just to get that customer in the door. And this right here is the magic number. For a business to actually be healthy and sustainable, your LTV needs to be at least 3 times your CAC. Think about it. For every single dollar you spend to get a customer, you need to be making at least $3 back in profit from them over time. If that ratio is off, your business is, well, it's basically a sinking ship. All right, now look at Baiju's own numbers. This is where it gets really crazy. In fiscal year 2022, their revenue more than doubled. Sounds great, right? But now look at the losses. They didn't just grow, they went supernova. hitting a mind-boggling 8,245 crore. This is a giant, flashing neon red light that their unit economics were completely and utterly broken. They were spending way, way more to get customers than those customers were ever going to be worth. So once those brutal financial realities started to actually see the light of day, the whole house of cards began to wobble, and then it came crashing down with unbelievable speed. You see, that broken economic model created this incredibly toxic, high-pressure sales culture. To chase these impossible targets, salespeople were allegedly misleading customers, pushing families into taking on expensive loans they just couldn't afford. This led to a huge wave of negative press and did serious, lasting damage to the company's reputation. In the end, when it came, was just brutal and swift. A massive delay in filing their financials in 2022 made investors really nervous. Then in 2023, their auditor, Deloitte, resigned. That's a huge red flag. Board members started sprinting for the exits. Lenders started suing them. By 2024, their whole U.S. operation was bankrupt, and the game was pretty much up. And then came the final admission. And it didn't come from an analyst or a reporter. It came from the founder himself. In October 2024, Baiju Ravindran confirmed the unthinkable. The company he had built into a $22 billion giant was now, in his own words, worthless. The story of Baiju's is so much more than just a business failure. It's a really powerful cautionary tale for the entire startup world. So what are the key lessons we can pull from this? I think the ultimate lesson here is stark. First, growth for growth's sake is a total fantasy. If there's no path to actually making money, it's a dead end. Second, forget the flashy headlines about valuation. The real health of a business is in that boring old math, the unit economics. And finally, that relentless pressure to justify a sky-high valuation can lead to terrible, company-destroying decisions. And that really leaves us with a much bigger, kind of uncomfortable question. The entire culture of Silicon Valley and the tech scene is built around chasing this unicorn status. But is that very obsession, that focus on valuation above everything else, actually setting more companies up for this kind of spectacular failure? In the end, after all the billions of dollars, the global sponsorships, the celebrity endorsements, and all the hype, the story of Baiju's ends on a much, much quieter note. This phrase, "one car go to home," was reportedly used by an employee to describe the scene as the company's once bustling headquarters finally emptied out. Just a simple, melancholy sentence that captures the lonely end of what was once the biggest education company in the world.